So today we're going to talk about texturing and UVing, and we're going to start off with something very small and then we'll work our way up until we get to more complex models. So let's just start with something very simple. So what I have right here is a simple cube, and what I want to do is I want to turn this cube into, let's just say, a cardboard box. If I want to use it for an animation or a game or anything like that, we need to UV it and we have to make a texture for it and apply the texture to the object. Doing so is very simple. It just all depends on how your model is made, how many faces there are, and how much geometry it has overall. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to save this project. So I'm just going to go save this to, I'm going to go to this one right here. And I'm just going to save it to this folder right here. So I'm going to just title it box, enter. And the reason I'm doing that is just so I have a saved file. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure I set my project to that folder. So I'll just go back to that folder and I'm going to create a default workspace. The reason why I'm doing that is extremely important because all the files I already have, so I already have my texture for it in that folder and everything like that. And the reason we're setting this project is so the program knows where everything is located for this specific project. So things like the textures and the model all go into that one folder. So if I ever need to, I can put that folder on a Google Drive or Flash Drive or anything, bring it over to another computer and open it up and everything will work properly. If you don't do that, there'll be times where your textures won't come up correctly or you'll be missing stuff. And it's just overall good to have everything organized into one place. So we have this one cube right here and we're going to turn that into our cardboard box. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to go to my Hypershade. I'm going to create a new material. In this case, I'm just going to use a standard Lambert. And I'm going to go to color. And what I'm going to do is instead, where we normally click on the color to change whatever color we want, I'm going to click on this little checkerboard right here. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a bunch of different nodes. In this case, I want a file node. So I'm going to click on file. And what that does is it adds a little section that goes into the color saying, hey, we have a file here, we have a texture, and that's going to go into the color for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my file node is selected, just like it is right now. And I'm going to go down here to where it says image name. You'll see a little folder. I'm going to click that. And as you can see, it already went to that folder we set our project in. In this case, I'm going to click on cardboard box. So right here is my texture, just a little preview of it. And we're going to add it to our shader. Now I can get out of here, or I can just use the Hypershade to bring my model over, or my shader over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to middle mouse click and drag the shader to my object, just like that. And it is now on our object. If it doesn't show up like it is right now, I'm going to hit 6 on my keyboard and now I'll apply the texture. So what we have right now is our shader is on our cardboard box. And as you can see, this doesn't look correct at all. That's because we didn't UV it. So UVing is basically taking this object, splitting it into different faces, and pretty much sewing them back together to create our object. So I'm going to move this a little bit to the side so I have a little room to work with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my UV tab right here, and I'm going to go to UV editor. So with my UV editor, we have this window right here. Let me just kind of scale this in a little bit. And we have a lot of different things we're going to do here. So the first things first, let us show our UV. And this T-shape, upside down T-shape is our cardboard box. If I go to face mode and hover over these little faces, each one lights up to correspond with the actual object, which is perfect. It makes things a lot easier for us to figure out where things are going and how they're supposed to be set up. So the next thing we're ready to do is we're going to UV it. So the first step is we're going to cut all our UVs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to UV by right-clicking and dragging to UV. And I'm going to just drag a box around the entire object like that. So all my UVs will light up, these little green dots. I'm going to go to cut/sew, and I'm going to hit cut. What that does is now this object is not one solid object, there's separate UVs. So if I click on any of these squares and move them around, I can move them off the object. And as you can see, as I'm moving things around, the texture changes. So let's talk about our UV editor for right now. What it is it's a very similar setup to the quadrants on our grid in the 3D view. But think of it as pretty much a small workspace. So in our first quadrant right here, the one that our texture is in, that is the only quadrant that's usable. What that means is every time I apply a texture, it will only fit into this one big square. Every other square is just workspace area. So if I take any of these UVs and move them away, it will still show up the texture as if it was in that correct spot, but we're only going to use that as a workspace. So what I'll end up doing is I'd move all these squares to one side and work on one piece at a time, or put the finished piece in this area. But it really is different for each person. So let me just zoom in a little bit so we get as much of a screen as possible. And now we're ready to UV it. So the way a UV works is we split every single face, so they're all separate. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our texture in this case as a guide, and we're going to sew things back together. So let's look for the top face right here. So that's this one right here. So using my texture as a guide, I know that this piece right here is the top face. Just like that. So what I'll do is I'm going to try my best to move it on top of that piece of the texture. Just like that. If it's not perfect, that's fine. We're going to come back in and correct it anyway. We're going to do one piece at a time. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to find the next piece right here. So using my texture as a guide, I want to find this square or this face that's going to attach to this one. So what I'll do is I'll switch to edge mode, and I'll hover over which one. And as you see, as I hover over this edge right here, the one right here lights up as well. That means they're shared edges. So even though we split these objects, these faces into separate objects, they still correspond to one another. So in this case, what I'll do is I'm going to click on this edge right here, or you can click on this one, doesn't really matter. And I'm going to go to cut and sew, and I'm going to go to where it says move and sew. What that will do is it'll take those edges and sew them together, stitch them together basically, and make them one object again. So if I click that, it's going to take the one of them and move it to the other one for me. So in this case, it didn't work to my advantage because normally I already had that one set up there. And it usually happens with the first one, so don't worry about that. What I'll do is I'm going to go to UV shell, select this whole object since it's now one whole object, and I'm just essentially going to put that back into place. So all I'm really doing is moving my UVs right back into the place. And now that I have two done, the rest are going to be a lot easier because it goes by essentially the amount of objects that are attached. So since it was one, it'll kind of just go wherever. But now that we have two to this one, everything is going to go towards this one. So I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to click on the edge, cut and sew, move and sew, and now I'll fling that right over there. For the rest, I'm just going to hit G just to repeat the last command, which was the move and sew. I'm just going to bring them all back into place. So if we look at our object now, our texture fits a lot better than it was before. There are some areas where it's a little iffy. So if I look at it right here, you can see how we have like certain areas that have just like these thick black lines, while certain ones are kind of a little neater. So we're going to fix that now. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to UV, and I'm going to kind of zoom in onto one of these boxes first. And what I'll do is I'm just going to use my move tool and essentially just kind of fix it up as neatly as possible. That looks pretty okay. Let's see. I might bring it a little closer just to kind of hide that edge a little bit more. And all we're really doing is just kind of moving through our model and just trying our best to make it look a little more neat. In this case, I did a pretty good job, and I could really just leave it as it is, but for the sake of the instruction, I'm just going to make it a little bit more neat than I can. So all I'm really doing is adjusting each one of these UVs. So just going like that. Let's take another look at it. That looks pretty good. And that is essentially the most basic way of applying a UV to an object. So it looks great, and everything works out pretty well. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to bring it over here. I get rid of this for now. We're going to essentially work the opposite way. Once you become fairly comfortable with UVing, you can work with very different ways in creating your model to fit your texture, or to make a texture to fit your model. So this one, we had a texture that kind of fit our model, that we kind of just made sure actually went really well. So we're going to take an object like a sphere right now. Let me scale this on up. And what we're going to do, we're going to apply a texture that I already created that fits this model. So I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to go for a blend this time, just give it a little shine. Go to color, add a new file node, go to the folder, and we're going to click on basketball. So this looks very weird, and the reason why is because it actually fits with our UV. So if I add it to this, you can see that it fits nicely, because if I look at my UVs for it, if I look right here, we already see that pretty much all my UVs fit really nicely in getting together. You could see a little bit of like choppy edges, but we can always change that based on how much geometry we have. So that looks a little bit better since I smoothed it out and everything like that. So that's pretty good. So that's it for part 1 of this tutorial on UVing and texturing. In part 2, we're going to go on with a very large model, and then we'll just kind of split that into pieces. All right.